Hello, my name is Jim McGillivray and welcome to the Pipe Box, your source for all things piping. If you find this video useful, please give it a like and please subscribe to this YouTube channel to see more videos like this. You can print out a score of the tune we're going to do today by going back to the description of this video on my YouTube channel. You'll find a link to a PDF there. Today I would like to do a Piobaireachd with you. The Piobaireachd I would like to do is called Lady Anapool's Lament. The tune is about 10 minutes in length and it's pretty suitable for all levels. It could be a bit long for a beginner, but certainly the ground and the first two variations would be excellent submissions to a novice Piobaireachd contest. And the whole tune is accessible to beginner Piobaireachd players as long as they can play a dre movement, a Taorluath, a Crunluath, and perhaps a Crunluaths. We're not sure of the composer of this tune. It may have been the blind piper Ian Dall Mackay. He is thought to have composed the lament for the Laird of Anapool, and by association it's been thought he composed the lament for Lady Anapool as well. However, no one has proved a solid connection between the two tunes. There isn't even a place called Anapool. There is a place called Anapool on the shore of Loch Hope in Scotland, and as it turns out, the Laird and Lady's patrons were relatives of Ian Dall Mackay. So there is a speculative connection between Ian Dall and Lady Anapool's Lament. For those new to Piobaireachd, like all Piobaireachd, this one begins with an erler, or ground, which introduces us to the melody in kind of a disguised way. After that, we're going to play five variations on the groundwork. As we go through these variations, the melody will become more obvious and the technique will become more difficult. The effect of Piobaireachd in general is slow, though as Archibald Campbell of Kilberry once wrote, the piper often overdoes the slowness. As we work through this tune, I'm going to be talking about ways of overcoming the tendency to play Piobaireachd too slowly. Nothing kills Piobaireachd quicker than a slow tempo. So we'll find ways to keep the tune moving and engaging while still bringing out the expressive nuances of the melody. Let's have a look at the whole score quickly before we delve into this tune. This is Angus Mackay's setting as published by the Piobaireachd Society. I've transcribed it here to make it a little easier to read. As you can see on this page, there are two variations, the ground and the first variation. Each variation consists of 3 lines of equal length. The first line in each variation is repeated. As you can see here, it's quite apparent that the first variation is substantially different from the ground in terms of technique. If we go to the second page, we see a variation very similar to the previous one, and this is followed by what I call the complex technical variations, the Taorluaths, the Crunluaths, and the Crunluaths. If we look at the third page of the score, we see the abbreviations that are used in the later portions of the tune, and we'll go over these in the next video. Okay, let's get into the ground. It's written in common time, which means there are 4 beats in each bar. I like to call these beats in Piobaireachd pulses rather than beats. I want you to think something very specific with these 4 pulses. The first one is going to be a very strong pulse. The second and third will be medium length pulses, and the fourth pulse will be strong. So here's the pattern: strong, medium, medium, strong in each bar. The key here, and this is the most important thing you'll learn in this video today, is to not linger on the 2 medium pulses. Pipers often get caught up in the middles of bars, and that tends to stagnate Piobaireachd after a line or two. Don't linger on the middle two pulses. Roll through these, give the start and the end of the bar lots of length. Let me sing line 1 following this strong, medium, medium, strong pattern. He adin ti o abro ti hadin ti ro vanto he ro vanto io abro he hadin. Let's look quickly at bar 2. In the middle of bar 2 is a B eighth note after a cadence. You may have noticed that I put a dot on that B, and that is quite a common interpretation of this bar and the bar below it in line 3. This can be played holding the B or playing it as a slow rundown. So I play it. It can be played something like that. Let's continue. Strong, medium, medium, strong. Line 2. Tiro bro bro ado iaba cambra ia canto hiro bro hiro hibidi hi hara anto hiro. And line 3, Tio hibidi ando hibidi hiro ira kando hiro vanto tiro hibidi hiro vanto anti-habro. One other point to make about this ground before I play the whole ground for you is these short rundowns, for example, in bar 2 that we discussed. These ones. And don't be afraid to play that short note in a fairly snappy fashion. It's not a lazy short note. It's not. It's. Okay, let's listen to the whole ground played on a Dager electronic chanter. You'll notice that after I played the ground, I played a couple of bars of the first variation, just to show you the transition from the ground to the first variation. Transitions between variations in Pibroch are very, very important. They need to be figured out and practiced in order to play them well. We'll talk about those as we proceed here. In this variation, again, we can follow our strong, medium, medium, strong guideline. Although, as the variations proceed in Pibroch, I tend to focus mostly on the fourth pulse. So I would play this variation a little bit like this. This little extra bit of pointing on the fourth pulse needs to be very subtle. You don't want to hit people over the head with it. It should be almost imperceptible, but it just lends the tune a little bit of structure and, let's say, commas and periods in the music. This variation is pretty well pointed. However, it's not clipped. The variation after this one is going to be a little quicker and a little more pointed. So we need to leave ourselves a little bit of room in the G-ish singling in terms of tempo and pointing. I'm going to play the last two bars of the ground. I'm going to play the first variation and the first two bars of the doubling of the first variation so you can hear the transition between the first variation and the doubling. One thing I would like you to be cognizant of in this variation and the next one is that there are no D grace notes, all G and E grace notes. If you're not an experienced Pibroch player, you may have a desire to start throwing D grace notes into those variations, and there are none. So this G-ish variation has a partner. It's the second G-ish variation known as the doubling, or second time through the variation. The note pattern is the same, except now we're going to play the theme note twice instead of having a low A in between theme notes. This variation is extremely pointed, and I like to play it in an almost hurried fashion. As described to me by one of my instructors, the E grace note is right on the back of the G grace note. They are very close together. You should find this variation technically difficult to play. If you're finding it easy to play technically, you're probably not pointing it enough. Again, a very slight hanging on the fourth pulse in each bar, but again, very, very subtle. Do not compromise your rhythm by overholding notes. Okay, here is the variation showing the transition from the variation before it and the transition to the variation after it, the Taorluath variation. I hope you could hear as I went into that variation out of the singling that I sped up very slightly and I played it much more pointed than the singling. When you go from one Piobaireachd variation into another, there's almost always a tempo change, either up or down. With the end of this variation, we've reached just over the halfway point in this tune. As I mentioned earlier, if you're new to Piobaireachd and are inclined to enter a novice Piobaireachd contest, the ground and first two variations of this tune would be more than suitable to enter in such a contest. I think that's enough to look at for today. Next video we will look at the technical variations, the Taorluath, the Crunluath, and the Crunluath amach. Until then, from me, Jim McGillivray at the Pipe Box, good piping.